I'm Sunny Schwartz. I'm Executive Director of MassBioEd, and thank you for joining us for a discussion with 3 life sciences CEOs on what their plans are for the workplace post-COVID. We all know that the pandemic brought a pretty quick shift in our workforce that was a little bit unexpected, where many people started working remotely. And after more than a year of that, a lot of companies are changing their policies permanently. Before we hear from our panel about their plans, we'd like to hear from all of you. So if you just click on the polls tab at the bottom of your screen, you can take the poll, which asks your preference for returning to work post-COVID. So take a minute to do that, and we'll share the results shortly. And also you can see there's a Q&A tab at the bottom. You can feel free to post questions anytime during the conversation, and we will get to them after we hear from our panelists. So we are here this afternoon with Jackie Fouse, CEO of Agios Pharmaceuticals, John Maraganore, CEO of Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Mark Bamforth, CEO of Arranta Bio. So I'm going to ask each of you just to start by telling us just the number of employees you have, the locations where you have employees, and the rough mix of lab, manufacturing employees, folks who have to be on site to do their work, and what we'll call office workers who maybe could be off-site. So Jackie, you want to start?
Happy to start. So thanks for having us this afternoon. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. We at Agios have currently about 400 employees. And in the middle of this whole situation, we also went through a change in strategy. So we went down from about 600 people to 400, which the relevance of that just is related to the mix of the tenure of the people that we have and the number of new hires that we have and the percentage of our employees that actually have been onboarded virtually over the last 12 to 15 months. And we might touch on that a little bit later, but our employee mix has definitely changed pretty significantly over the last year. So currently about 400 employees, all of them except for our field-based employees, of which those are about 10%. The rest are Cambridge based only. So we don't have any other office locations. All of our manufacturing is outsourced. So the percentage of people in Cambridge who would be in our labs or the people that manage our facilities is probably 20 to 25% of that population. And the rest is office based.
Got it. And John, do you want to give us the makeup of Alnylam?
Yeah, let me go through some numbers. So 1,500 employees today in 20 locations, 20 offices that we have globally. That includes obviously a predominant number of our employees in Massachusetts. We have 391 lab and manufacturing employees in Massachusetts, and everybody else is an office-based employee or a field-based employee in the US. Then in the UK, we've got about 100 employees, and then 40 employees each in Zug, Amsterdam, and Tokyo, about 14 employees in Sao Paulo. So truly global at this point in time.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Hi, good afternoon. So Arranta Bio is a contract manufacturer. So we're focused on the microbiome and manufacture plasmids for partnership. So we have today about 175 employees, but because of the nature of our business, 80 to 85% are really on-site employees, either in the labs, in manufacturing, or in the support functions like quality assurance or warehousing, etc. So we have roughly 55 employees at our site in Northern Florida and about 115 at our site in Watertown, Massachusetts, and a small number of employees that are based remotely and don't have a regular office presence.
Great. So we have a mix of sizes of companies represented here. So looking at a company like Amgen, right, who's a huge employer who employs about 24,000 people globally, you probably know that they've recently announced that most of its workers will continue to work remotely even after the pandemic. They surveyed employees and they found that 80% of the workforce wanted to continue to work from home. And this policy will not only make their workers happy, but also lower operating expenses and preserve profit margins. So my question to you all is, does Amgen's policy put pressure on other companies to embrace a flexible workplace? And what are your company's plans on return to work post-COVID regarding remote, in-person, or hybrid? And why did you make that decision? So who wants to start with that?
Jackie, you start.
Okay, I'll start, but I don't want to go first every time. So,
Okay.
So we also did surveys throughout the pandemic on a lot of different issues, including how we were supporting people with their in-home offices and things like that. And then we've now done a couple of rounds of surveys around the future working model as well. And our data is showing somewhere around, I would say 55 to 60% of people want to do a hybrid model. And the definition of hybrid is be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. Another roughly 25 to 30% said they would like remote only. And really a quite modest percentage, it surprised me a little bit, was 15-20% said that they wanted to be back in the office most of the time. And even those employees said, you know, maybe 4 days a week maximum, that they wouldn't want to come every day. And the couple of times that we've done it, the data has been very consistent. Some of the external information I've looked at, the ranges seem like they're broadly consistent with that. So I think, one, to respect what you're hearing from your employees, at least in our case, and two, the competitive pressures of the Cambridge market. I mean, we all know what those are, right? John and all of us doing business in Cambridge, and just generally, I think in healthcare, are going to push us in the direction of more choice. So what we're going to do when we get to the fall, and if I'm going too long, just stop me, because you may have other parts to the question, but is we're going to give people a choice starting in September and let them choose mostly remote, mostly in, or hybrid. And then once they make the choice, we want people to stick with that for 6 months, because we want to learn through this, do another survey at the end of that period of time, and figure out, you know, what the new equilibrium looks like, because I think things may swing back and forth a little bit. What works, what doesn't work, what types of connections are the most meaningful for people, how do we address cultural issues, things like that. And then we'll do that pilot, learn from that, and, you know, go from there. So it also helps our facilities people know how many people are in which buckets, so they can manage the flow of people that are coming and going, because the lab people will be there most of the time anyway. We want to kind of respect how we manage flows of people around them too. But
Got it. Thank you. Mark, do you want to share your plans?
Yes, Sunny, it's maybe also worthwhile reflecting in March of last year, when we went into shutdown mode, we didn't have a lot of manufacturing up and running at that time. It was mainly lab work. We had a smaller organization. So anyone who could work from home, we told them to work from home. And the people that needed to come in on site, we actually put them onto a split shift pattern. So we really reduced our on-site presence at any moment in time to about 30% of what it had been. And that was great for 2 or 3 months as we got through that initial wave. But as the year progressed and we added more staff, as you heard, more of our staff, their role really is at site. And so it's hard to do anything other than have those people at site, because the work is physically there, hands-on. So when it came to the second wave, kind of after Thanksgiving through February, again, we tried to have anyone who didn't need to be at site work from home. But now increasingly, we have more people coming into the site. As we look to the future, as you heard, you know, 80% roughly of our roles are really on-site roles. And so we don't have a lot of flexibility with those. What we had pre-pandemic was a view that, hey, if you can work from home for a day per week and you want to do that, then we'll support that. And we said, and if there's an exception where somebody wants to do 2 days per week from home, we'll look at that. We'll see if we can make that work. Now I think we're more open to a hybrid model where, hey, we know that we can connect in from all over the place to Zoom meetings, and it's close to being in the same location. And so I think we're more open to there being specific roles that can work in a hybrid model. And then I'd also say that over the last 6 months, we've hired more people who are not based at one of our sites and been open to not requiring them to relocate, but saying to them, okay, let's try to make your role work from a remote location where perhaps you travel to site occasionally to meet with people. So I think we're going to continue to have more flexibility and open-mindedness about that. But I think as Jackie described it, we're going to have to assess how well that works. So that's our situation.
All right, John, what are the plans for Alnylam?
Well, they're very similar to what Jackie described. And we have really will have 3 types of work and learn from that foundation. And our estimates are similar to what Jackie described for Agios in terms of the mixture of physical on-site versus hybrid versus virtual type of workforce. You commented at the beginning around Amgen and what Amgen's doing and how did that impact what we're doing. And honestly, I had no idea, nor do I care very much about what Amgen's doing. I care more about what Takeda's doing and NIBR's doing and Vertex is doing and Agios is doing. And so that's where it was clear that the market here is going into this 3-bucket approach, which is actually not how we initially thought we would do this. We thought we'd be much more, let's all get back at it, with more flexibility, of course. But we did see, to your point about pressure, we did see that the market has really gone to this 3 bucket approach, and we have basically succumbed to the market in this regard, and we're going to figure out how to be effective and operational and creative and innovative in that mode.
Great. Well, we got our poll results in from our participants, and I don't know if you'll be surprised to hear this from the surveys that you did with your employees, but the vast majority, 82% of the people who took the poll here said that they prefer hybrid to return, and only 11% full-time in the office and 7% full-time remote. So just to get a sense of the people who are listening to this. So I think the next question is, how do we get there from here? So you outlined some policies where people have some choices. Your workers will have some choices. So the question is, over what period of time will you implement this? And what about, I think people have a lot of questions from both companies, colleges, nonprofits like ours. Are you requiring vaccinations of your employees? Are you going to have testing? Is it masks on or masks off? So it'd be really helpful to hear how you are thinking about this. Whoever wants to start with that.
Well, let me maybe dive in. We are absolutely beginning to implement this process. We have pilot programs where employees are coming back to our facilities. I mean, we've had our lab and manufacturing employees here the whole time, of course, but we are having office-based employees beginning to come back to our facilities in Massachusetts and also in the UK, where vaccination rates are in both cases very, very high. We are requiring, at least through Labor Day, that all of our returning employees in the US self-attest to being fully vaccinated. In the UK, we can't require that, but we do encourage vaccination for employees coming back to our Maidenhead offices. And we are actively assessing the masking situation. We're likely to keep masking in common spaces for the foreseeable future. We just decided today that we would allow fully vaccinated employees in a conference room in a meeting to be maskless in the conference room. So this is very dynamic for us. We review this weekly and implement changes that are appropriate with public health measures and local recommendations as well. But that's where we currently are at this point.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in and as I described, we didn't really stop working. We had most of our employees still coming to site. So we did implement twice weekly testing on site. We found that to be highly effective. We actually detected cases that were not detected by an approved diagnostic lab in a subsequent test. So that says something about having your own on-site PCR testing, as well as all the other things, of course, that have been required. What we've been doing over the last number of weeks is every couple of weeks, we've been surveying our employees to ask how many are vaccinated, how many are planning to get vaccinated, how many will but just haven't planned it yet, and how many don't want to get vaccinated. And that's been really interesting. Actually seen a little bit of a contrast between Massachusetts being generally employees being more ready to get vaccinated than in Northern Florida, although that gap now is very small, just a few percent. And what we're also seeing is an increase in the number of people who are vaccinated. So that's been great. We're continuing to review that, and what we're looking for is to get to a point where we have a high level of vaccination, and we're still assessing whether at that point we would allow employees not to wear masks. So right now we have vaccinated and unvaccinated employees coming to site, continue to wear masks and socially distance, but we definitely want to, as John described, follow the guidelines that we're getting to keep employees safe, but see where we're able to start to relax some of those requirements.
I think our situation is similar to Mark and John's as well. We have currently 97% of our people already vaccinated or have their appointments. I mean, and so it's high, and it's been high for a while. We did a survey about that a few months ago, and that's essentially what the percentage was that said we're going to do it. So we have been requiring people to continue to wear their masks in the office, but we're going to start relaxing that if everybody who's in a group, say that's doing a team meeting or something, has been vaccinated. But I mean, a bit like John said, we're kind of working our way into this up to Labor Day, and then after that, we would be in the situation where it would most likely be no masks and things like that. It may also be worth saying we had started already last summer a hoteling concept for workspace if people wanted to come in, as long as we respected the capacity constraints imposed by the state and all of that. And I think maybe because it was still in the throes of the pandemic, we just didn't have very many people sign up for it, even if they could have. So we are starting to gradually see a little bit more interest in people to come back. Because we had that already set up where a team, for example, could book a conference room and go into a conference room with 10 or 12 people, depending on the size of the room and things like that. We had some teams doing a bit more of that over the last couple of months. We've been having our leadership team meetings from my direct reports at least once a month in the office for the last 3 months, but we wear masks. Up to now, we've been wearing our masks the whole time. So I think it is going to be a little bit of a gradual thing. We try to ask people what their preferences are. So if there's going to be 10 of us in a meeting and we've all been vaccinated and people are fine now with not wearing the mask, we'll probably ask, is everybody okay with it? And then we'll maybe not wear the mask and kind of move into it that way. So.
Well, Jackie, you brought up a couple things. You brought up the hoteling concept. So I'm wondering, with that, in this new paradigm, does every employee still have a desk to work at? Or if a lot of folks are going to be hybrid, do you reduce the number of desks or space, and then people can choose where they sit each day?
That's a great question, because we're in the middle of trying to figure all of that out. And that's one of the reasons why we're we want people to make a choice for this 6-month pilot and then stick with that choice for the 6 months, because the concept would be if you're hybrid or mostly remote, then you don't have you may not always have the same space to go to. If you're mostly in the office, you might have a dedicated space. We happen to have been in the middle of a renovation when all of this hit as well, which has its advantages and disadvantages. So we were going to a little more open workspace environment and less individual offices, because we frankly, compared to some of the external, work that we did to look at it, we were a little heavy on individual offices and a little light on common workspace. So we were headed in that direction anyway, while not going all the way to full blown common. So we had to put most of that on hold, of course, with the pandemic, but we did get 2 floors done, and employees who have been in those spaces have given us really positive feedback about the common areas and how we've designed those. So we're taking the survey work that we've done, and we're now trying to estimate, how many people would need a discrete space, how many people are saying they want more collaboration space, because that's what we're also hearing is when people are in, we're asking them, what do you value most about your in-office experience? Is it sitting in an individual office, or is it being in a collaborative space? And so we're taking that feedback and using it to figure out how we address the exact layouts of the space on a go-forward basis. I think we're going to end up in a situation, we kind of reset our employee base, but we're growing rapidly again. We may not really need all the space that we have right now, because we had space that could go up to probably close to 1,000 people in our previous strategy, and now we don't need that for quite a while. So we may end up subletting some of it out at some point.
That's really helpful. Just a follow-up question on the vaccinations. John, you were the only one that I heard say that you were requiring vaccinations for people returning in your US facility. And I know from our pre-call, that's not for the manufacturing folks because they have no choice but to come back, but it's for the people who do have a choice. So that might be a minority position. MassBio just did a survey of member companies, and it found that a little less than a third were requiring vaccination. So wondering, are you getting any pushback on that? Are there any hiccups with that?
Yeah, I know we're probably in the minority on that issue, but we're a science-based company, and we believe in the science around vaccines and what they do from a protection standpoint. And frankly, our philosophy is for the returning non-lab or manufacturing-based employees that are coming back into our offices. We welcome them back. It's terrific that they're coming back, but we want to preserve the safety of our lab and manufacturing employees. And so that's why we're asking them to be fully vaccinated. We obviously, for those that have been working in our facilities the whole time, many of them, most of them, 96% actually, to close to Jackie's number, have either been vaccinated or have been scheduled to, or have one shot, and et cetera. So it's an incredibly high percentage, as you would imagine. But we just think it's important to, for this period right now where we have sort of returning employees up until the fall, that those employees coming back that don't need to be in our offices are fully vaccinated for the protection of our lab and manufacturing employees. And that's a stance that we've taken.
Got it.
We haven't had pushback on it. In fact, we've had really positive reception from our lab and manufacturing employees who feel like we got their back and we're protecting them. And that's what we're aiming to do.
Great. So another question on sort of how do these policies affect corporate culture? So Mark, you mentioned you are now able to hire people fully remote that you couldn't hire before. So how do you integrate fully remote employees into your organizational culture?
Yeah, I think it definitely takes some work. I think you got to work harder at the communication. We used to have a big quarterly town hall meeting to share information about how the company was doing and what was coming up. We immediately moved to weekly Zoom meetings, 30 minutes, so short, sharp, relevant, We've moved those to every other week, but we're still doing those every other week. So high level of communication that all employees can tap into. But then more than that, going to lunch and learns. And again, having two sites that are 1,000 miles apart, it's a great way to actually connect those sites to hear a common message that otherwise is harder to deliver. We've done other things like create employee resource groups. So if you think about some of the things you miss, having lunch with employees from a different team and discovering that, oh, you know, that's your favorite team or your sport or your pets or whatever your interests may be outside of work. So trying to encourage those who want to get together and chat about, hey, how do you keep kids busy during a pandemic? What are you doing? And trying to create forum that allow people to make some of those social interactions that they would be making if they were in person at work. So that's a piece of it, the communication piece. I would say that, you know, we had very little travel between our two sites for 14 months, 15 months. And now that we've really opened that up over the last 5-6 weeks, we've really found some things that we had missed just in terms of the level of engagement and understanding of some of the challenges and needs at each site. And so there's definitely a need for that in-person interaction. But I think the enhancements we've made in online tools, we'll never lose that. I think that's with us now, and we see the benefits of a lot of the things we put in place.
Great. Jackie or John, any thoughts about integrating remote employees? Or another cultural issue that's come up is sort of, will there be a cultural divide between the folks who have to be there on site, the manufacturing folks, the lab folks, versus staff who could choose, as you said, make a choice between being remote, hybrid, or in person?
I mean, I think we're going to have to work at this to make sure that there aren't any of those biases kind of in the system, even if they're unconscious biases. We've spent a lot of time with our leadership team, and what's also been interesting, including my direct reports, but then the next group down, we call an extended leadership team that includes all of the vice presidents and above level. And we've looked at the survey results by the different groups. And I think the good news in a way, because I didn't really expect this, is that the choices people have said they want to make, or the ranges of percentages are about the same across those different groups. So we don't have like all the senior people saying they want to be in the office all the time, and it's only, you know, the next levels that say they don't, or something like that. The way it's apportioned is pretty similar. So I think that's good. But we spent a lot of time talking about that to make sure that we incorporate into our leadership training and anybody who manages people that there are certain skills that they're going to have maybe that are used more in the future, because you have to be more flexible in terms of how you communicate with people, how you create those connections with some of your people that may be remote. Now, we also are making sure that the role matches up with the choice that someone wants to make. So if somebody needs to be in the office more, they can't say that they're going to be remote all the time. So there does have to be agreement from the manager that the role can accommodate the choice that the person makes. But I think there's going to be some trial and error with this. I really do. We have to stay attentive to how we manage performance issues, keep people incentivized, create the connections, which is why we're listening to people like, what types of connections do you value the most when you are in person? And we've done some of the things like Mark was talking about, and we're looking at like a list of things that we can do on a go-forward basis to create the connections that will match up most closely with what people are saying they value the most. I just think leaders are going to have to be even better leaders in the future than they are right now to keep teams together and all those sorts of things. So we may have some types of meetings that we say we really encourage you to be there in person too, right? I mean, we may do some of that. I know another company, and I'll stop talking, but that I heard from a colleague the other day, because I'm on another board with him. They are going to do some form of choice, but they're going to, even for the hybrid, they're going to say there's 2 set days a week that you need to be there. So it's not that, everybody comes in on Monday and Tuesday, half, and then another half on Thursday and Friday. They are going to tell people you have to be in, I forget if it's Tuesday and Wednesday or Wednesday and Thursday. And then even under the hybrid mode, they're going to put some guardrails around it. So we're probably not going to do that just yet, but we're going to see how it goes.
So in that case, all employees would come on the same 2 days.
That's what he said. Yep. This is a West Coast based company. It's probably about the same size as John's.
John, anything to add about the sort of corporate culture integrating remote employees, or kind of a divide between manufacturing and hybrid? And there was a question that came in from our participants, was sort of training supervisors to manage a hybrid workforce, which Jackie touched on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I'm very worried about the culture implications of this new world that we're going into. But I think that's a challenge that we're all accepting, and we're all gonna, as Jackie said, we're all gonna become better leaders as a result of all this, because we're gonna have to figure this out together, and have to find ways to, maintain and foster our culture while we're in a, mixture approach, between physical and hybrid and virtual. And so I think there's no doubt that we're going to have to, come up with novel techniques for how we can maintain aspects of what's been so important and differentiating for many of our companies. At the end of the day, there's probably nothing more important than culture at the end of the day. And we know how powerful that is for business success. So the question that came in from the panel, from the outside, Sunny, again, just real briefly, was,
what are you implementing any training programs for supervisors to manage kind of this new workforce?
Yeah, we're beginning to think a lot about that. It's too early to say exactly what we're doing, but yes, I mean, we're going to have to help equip our managers with new skills and new techniques for managing, their groups, which might be a mixture of physical and hybrid and virtual. And so there's going to be an element of that from a training perspective that we introduce for our managers so that they can be effective. But a lot of those tools and a lot of those approaches are not yet, effectively described to begin with. And so we're all going to learn what those training techniques are for managers to deal with that type of group.
Great. So another question, we heard a lot this morning from Carla about how there are not enough workers to meet the growing demand from your companies and all the life sciences companies in Massachusetts. And we're about to hear in the next panel how that demand is going to get even greater. So does this ability to hire fully remote workers change your hiring processes at all? Does it expand the number of people you can hire? Mark, I think you touched on this a little bit. Does it open up a new workforce for you?
Yeah, maybe workforce makes it sound like large numbers of people, whereas I think it's more of a on point for very specific individuals. So I think it does open up the potential that we hire people, and we've done some of this, who have a skill set, but they have family commitments or they have other reasons why they don't want to up sticks and move. And we figured out that, hey, let's try it out then. Let's see if we can make it work. I think the key to being able to make it work is that you have processes in place that they know how things function. And to the extent that you have standard work or ways that you get work done that those people can then plug into, that becomes essential. Because if they're just trying to freewheel and figure out how do I get stuff done, who do I go to, that could be very hard to be effective. So if you get somebody with the right knowledge and experience and you can plug them into well-described processes, then I think that does open up the opportunity to have people from different locations to join the company without having to move.
Yeah, I think one opportunity is to really improve the diversity of our workforce. I think there's really an opportunity here that as we think about hiring without the constraint of being located here in Massachusetts or here within the Kendall Square area, for those that have longer commutes, you could begin to open up the aperture of a workforce that might be a more diverse workforce. And I think that's a real opportunity that that's in front of us. So I'm excited about that aspect of it, to be honest. I think there's a real opportunity there that we can all harness.
I totally agree with that. And we've already seen it coming through in our data for the people that we've hired in the last 15 months. And we did a subset of our survey where we asked them about their remote hiring and onboarding experience and got a lot of really positive feedback. Our team just has done a terrific job. And like more than 90% of the people are saying that they feel well integrated in their functional area. To your point, Mark, about processes and things like that, they feel they understand what is required of them in their job. They feel able to do their job. All those sorts of things were very, very high. The part that came out very clearly in this and that we need to focus on is they want more cross-functional interactions. And that's the part I think that we have to work even harder at on a go-forward basis, and for those people that will be more remote than in person. And even to some extent, some of the ones who choose hybrid, I think they will tend to end up in more interactions within their functional area, and we'll have to work at creating those cross-functional connections. And some of that can be through cross-functional teams that they're working together anyway, and we'll be able to meet more in person. But that's the part of this that I think needs the most attention.
Got it. So I have one more question, then we're going to start taking more questions from the participants. So we've had a few come in, but feel free to put more questions in the Q&A panel and we'll get to those. John, I was struck when we had our prep call for this that you said something about having workers being remote has been productive, but it's not been great for innovation. And that really struck me. If you could just talk, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not that we haven't been innovative, but I think that the power of the casual physical interaction that you have in a hallway, by the coffee machine, by the entrance of the building, as you're walking across, into different buildings and so forth, that casual engagement is where so much of the innovation happens, right? So many of the ideas that get generated within a company, and it's hard to create that spontaneous connection with Zoom. I mean, it's, you can schedule some time with somebody and brainstorm with them. Of course, it's not to say that you can't do it, but that's a pre-planning of an engagement. And we all know that so much of the real creative ideas, the real sparks of innovation happen completely spontaneously, completely by people engaging in a way that was not planned at the end of the day. So I think that we've lost a lot of that over the last 14 months. And, I think it's another area when, we talked about culture earlier, but it's another area where I think we're going to have to be very thoughtful about how do we ensure in this new model that we can create the same level or maybe even greater level of innovation than we ever did before. But I do think we've missed that over the last 14 months.
So to that point that John just made about maybe even greater on a go-forward basis, I think a couple of things that we've had to do the other side of the coin a little bit. We've had some people give us feedback, and I can't give you a percentage or anything like that, but that said, because I had time to actually sit and think about something and focus on it, I actually came up with some ideas that I might not have come up with otherwise, or had some of the data scientist types and even some of the lab people who maybe ran their experiment and then took their data and went home and looked at it, say, I was able to get something out of that data because I could really sit there and just spend some focused time with it that I might not otherwise. So I think there's something about that we should try to keep. I think to John's point, we don't know what we don't know in terms of what we've missed, because the stuff that comes spontaneously you can't, you don't, you did miss something and you just don't even know what it is because it's spontaneous, right? So I think if we can find a way to get the best of both worlds by recognizing that in some situations and some people, they need the focus, they need the time to really go into something, that's helpful, but we also need the spontaneous interactions. And a lot of it, we're going to just have to work at it to get back to what comes of that from an in-person standpoint, especially if people are in the office in an asynchronous manner, right? And they're not always running into each other to the same extent. And maybe we get some of it from tools that are out there that create, the virtual spontaneous interactions, if those two things can actually go together. But we've been using a technology called Jamboard recently that we've gotten, or that people are really happy with, and some things like that. So I think it's going to be a mix, but there may be an opportunity with that. But we're going to have to work at it.
Great. So I'm just pulling in some questions from our participants. So just a simple question about asking about vaccination. So there's a question, is it legal, HIPAA compliant for an employer to ask about vaccination status?
I mean, what we do is a complete self-attestation, just like we ask employees about temperature and where they've been. We have an app that everybody who enters our facilities right now has to complete before they can come in. And we're not mandating it for their employment. We're simply saying, if you want to come into our facilities and you're not a lab or manufacturing employee, we require that you self-attest positively to having been vaccinated. And our lawyers have said that that is compliant with all local laws and regulations in the US. In the UK, we can't do that. We encourage people to be vaccinated, but we can't require it, and we can't ask people if they are or are not.
Got it. Okay, another question is around the competition from high tech, which we heard a little bit about this morning. So high tech in many cases is and has before allowed employees to work remotely pretty much forever. So does this, how do you deal with this kind of competition for your workers if you're not allowing for like a full remote work?
So, Sunny, I would say that many people that work in healthcare and life sciences work in this field because of the motivation that they feel in making an impact on people's lives. And so I think for many people, they wouldn't consider moving to a different industry. Obviously, there are some jobs, some roles that are very transferable to other sectors, but I don't see that as a major factor. And again, I think, as we've been describing, we are emerging with additional flexibility in consideration for how we match up employer needs and roles and employee needs with regards to their own personal situations.
I mean, Sunny, that the tech industry has been more virtual than our industry for quite some time. And I think the number of employees that go into the tech industry for people that leave our company is very small relative to going to other biotech. So I think it really consists with Mark's point.
Okay, great. And then a question about sort of cost implications of your policy. Jackie talked a little bit about this because they were in the middle of kind of a remodeling, but is there any plans to reduce your office space under this new model, or any cost savings that you can see or cost implications?
Well, we don't, I guess the short answer is we don't know yet. We know that, I guess, once we see the mix of people who say they want to be in more, they want to be in less, the hybrid, we're going to look at then what space would reflect that mix. We're not going to make a huge change right away, though, because to this point of the pendulum's probably going to swing around a little bit before it finds some equilibrium. We're going to kind of see how things go for probably, I'm going to guess, at least a year or so. And we may, if we can find flexible ways to optimize the use of the space by subletting some of it out. I mean, all of our space is leased and they're mostly long-term, right? So we can't change it from one day to the next anyway. But the one thing I can say is we're not going to have to expand. So, for how many times, John, have we talked about the cost of real estate in Cambridge, and if you're still growing, what things were going to cost over time. So I'm not going to have to worry about that.
I would just, I totally agree with Jackie on that point. I do think there will be implications here, and I even think there are going to be implications here for the whole life sciences cluster. That when we look back on it in 5 years, we're going to say, "Wow, things have really changed here." And so, it's something for MassBio and even the Commonwealth to think a little bit about. I mean, this is going to change a lot of the dynamic of even the attractiveness of the area for pharma, which has been, obviously very, very attracted to coming to this area. That's going to change the dynamic a little bit as well. So I think that's in turn going to have real estate implications, and probably make it a lot easier to find access to space in different parts of the area. So I think there's some good things there from a cost standpoint for sure, but I think there might be some negative things from an ecosystem standpoint that we need to understand. So let's see where it goes.
I think that's right. Some of I have a friend who's a EVP in a very large commercial real estate company, and I think some of the cities are going to be needing to do whatever they can to attract, right? So we may end up, as John, I think, is alluding to, in more of a competitive situation. And if companies are willing to accept more remote, you could end up with little hubs, in other places, other cities around the US, because I think it's going to be, I also was reading an article about some of the university campuses, or they're going to look at, university administrations are going to look at whether they can use their campus space more effectively, because they think they're going to be on more hybrid models on a go forward basis. And they're going to try to turn that into a little bit of a business model, especially ones that are located in places where you may have some life sciences or techie kind of things. They may try to get companies to come to their campus and take space in their campus, and some really interesting things are going to shake out of this, I think. So.
Great. So we have a few more minutes. So we're going to throw in a couple more questions before we let you go. A question from Bob C, who I'm thinking might be Bob Coughlin. I'm just guessing, perhaps.
Who's he? Who's he?
He's on the next panel, but
who's he?
Exactly. He has a lot of questions for you. So one is, have you or would you invest in virtual reality technology to do discovery and development remotely? And if you did, how did it go? And if not, why did you choose not to do that?
Mark, I think it's your turn.
Well, we don't do discovery as such. We do process development and then manufacturing. So, most of that needs to happen at the bench. I do think that we have all learned how to use Teams, for example, and so it's easier to collaborate with people outside the company. And there are certainly easier ways to share information, to have places to deposit information and look at it even in real time from different locations. So there are definitely easier ways to share information that we've all learned to become better at using. And that's going to stick with us, right? We're not going to lose. That will be one of the advantages that we've found. But it's limited in our case, that's for sure.
All right, what about, there's a couple questions about this new remote workforce and how it might, you talked about diversifying the workforce. So there's a question about, could it expand opportunities for people with disabilities or people with a mobility challenge? What about working parents? Does it make it easier for them to be effective workers?
Absolutely, all of the above. And I think, more importantly, I think it also allows us to find greater diversity of different races working in our industry. I think, right now, we're very focused in the Cambridge area, at least in the US. We've got a field-based organization that's all over the country, but we might be able to recruit, a greater, more diverse workforce from other parts of the country that are working virtually in an office-based function within Alnylam that we couldn't access before. So I think there's an opportunity here for diversity in its broadest way to really help us create a better company as a result. So I think that's an exciting upside of all this for sure.
Yep, I totally agree. We have had for a number of years more than 50% of our employee base with school-age children. So we had, I think Mark mentioned this about his company as well. We had a fair amount of flexibility programs prior to this, which actually served us well going into the pandemic, because we were used to having some people, in a hybrid work mode already with a fair amount of choice. So I think that's just going to continue. And the other thing I think about, having experienced this myself with aging parents, is you also have people that at certain moments in time need to spend more time with their aging parents. So it's not only people who have kids, it's people who have, so there's a whole bunch of, life, I think, dynamics here that there's an opportunity to get better alignment about how we work and how we live. And we're seeing that in some of the external information when people are saying, what have they learned in the pandemic and they don't want to go back to it. And a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to just sacrifice my whole personal life for my job anymore. And I'm not willing to do that. So yeah, I think we have to listen, but it's an opportunity.
I think there's a willingness to have a conversation that pre-pandemic probably wouldn't have happened. And an example for us, we were due to have a couple of interns come over from the UK last summer when, of course, they couldn't travel over. And in the end, we concluded that they could do their internship remotely. And it actually worked really well. And it meant for them that they were working into the evenings, but they could probably sleep in the morning. But it achieved the objectives. So I think, again, we've just all learned to become more flexible and adaptable.
Great. Last question is, would your companies be willing to provide technology to people that don't have it to help more people be able to access employment with you?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Can't work without the technology. And of course, ensuring that you have broadband access in different locations, that may be a barrier for some people that are harder to overcome. But I think even there, we're seeing changes happening with 5G and with satellite internet, etc. So hopefully that will level the playing field there as well.
Terrific. Well, our time is wrapping up for this session. Thank you so much, Mark, Jackie, and John, for a really informative conversation. I think it helped a lot of us think through these choices that are in front of all of us. So thank you for being leaders on this. So for all of the participants for the next session, just as you've done earlier, just go to the sessions tab and you click on the final session, which is called Expansion of the Life Sciences Sector. And we're going to hear from Bob Coughlin at JLL and Ben Bradford at MassBio and Rita Smith at AbbVie. So we will see you all there in a minute. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sunny.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.